the presentation, but we'll let him set it up and then we'll jump in. But if you're following along, 1 John 4 is one of the places that we're going to land, and I'm going to start off there as far as reading from the Scripture. But let's let him set this up tonight.
Class, and welcome back to week 2 of studying the book Stop Trying, Growing the Gospel Identity. And by now you have worked through chapter 1, which really introduces the concept of the experience of loss of a sense of self. Now we move on today to chapter 2, and we're going to dive a little deeper into what is a sense of self. What is identity? It took me a long time to wrap my brain around this. It's a very real thing, but it's a psychological thing. It's an intangible thing. It's a somewhat ambiguous thing, okay? So it's there. It's really driving your life. This is sort of what Proverbs is getting at when it says, guard or keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. So today we're going to unfold a definition of identity. And it is how to diagnose where you get yours. Maybe that's the best way to say it. It is your source of acceptance.
No, it's not. We queued up the wrong one, so sorry about that. We were actually in lesson 3. That was a rerun of last week, so for those of you who got a chance to see it.
Seriously?
Yeah, it said lesson 2, so I don't know, we messed up on that one, but...
That's my fault.
Not a big deal. But tonight, we're going to talk about, really, I think the lesson is titled Traditional Identity. And, just by way of review, we take some time to dive into the identity, the definition, if you would. The deepest idea, let me make sure I've got it here. Yeah, you got it. Okay, so the deepest idea of who you are, the story you tell about yourself, identity, is usually validated by 2 voices, internal, which is what I think about myself, and external, which others say about me. Obviously, this is incomplete, but we'll get into this later on. Identity formation is another term, what we trust to build ourselves. And so tonight, we're going to start off talking about kind of that weak identity and how we often look to really just the externals to really build that up. He starts off in this lesson, or in this chapter, setting up the scene of being at Disney World at the end of the day. If anybody's ever been there, I was a young kid when I went. I don't remember exactly all of this playing out, but at the end of the day, everybody's standing there. Tinkerbell comes out in the castle, and everybody's just oohing and awing, and the fireworks and perfectly timed music and just the chills, the goosebumps, the everything, and then all of a sudden it's over, and people are trying to get back to their cars. Kids are crying because they're overstimulated. Just that intersection of fantasy and reality, right? Like, oh, just this magical world, and then all of a sudden, sir, move to the right. Please watch out where you're stepping. And so he kind of sets it up like that. And really, fireworks are fun, right? The cotton candy, the fun, the theme parks, and so forth. But there's something about these fictional narratives that can reach beyond fantasy. It's partly our heart's desire for something better, partly a culture saturated with fake messaging, how to discover, quote, better. But sometimes our fictional stories flow from and connect with our deeper search and our skewed perspectives on reality. Beyond the fiction, there truly are conflicting, irrational beliefs and a resulting hopelessness in our world, which essentially says hope, but don't expect it to be real. And so We're going to talk about a couple of weak identity narratives to set this up here. Corporate world. Corporate world says success defines us. And you think about someone who may work in a, the corporate setting. Some of you know that, or some of you have worked there. It's all about the commissions and sales numbers. It's all about the, climbing the proverbial ladder, if you would. Then there is academia that declares that knowledge defines us. The universities and the college campuses, and a lot of kids are striving to reach the status of a Yale University or a Harvard University, or in the prestigious honors, of valedictorian, or whatever the case may be. And that academia declares that absolutely defines us. I was interested to read this part. One of the most popular classes a couple years ago on Yale's campus was a class on happiness. 1/4 of the undergrad student body enrolled in this elective to learn how to build a happy life. The New York Times quoted one freshman as saying, "In reality, a lot of us are anxious, stressed, unhappy, numb. The fact that a class like this has such large interest speaks to how tired students are of numbing their emotions so they can focus on their work, the next step, or the next accomplishment." The article goes on to describe how today's college students are discovering that good grades, great jobs, material possessions, and all their associated pressures simply do not make us happier. And I think that's true, right? We can all agree with that. So the corporate world, academia, society declares that audacity and self-discovery define us. He goes on to write that activist James Baldwin wrote, "In order to survive this, you have to really dig down into yourself and recreate yourself, really according to no image which yet exists in America. You have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you. No, not with its idea of you." So in other words, you're trying to tell the world what to believe about you. Okay? So on one hand, he says, on one hand, I want to shout, yes, defy the oppression of unjust stereotypes. But on the other hand, you want to stop and say, wait, can anyone just decide who they are? So it's conflicting. Then there's pop culture that says identity is something that we create through beauty, social branding, or realized dreams, whether it's Facebook giving us more than 50 gender options, or our world swirls with weak identity narratives, both fictional and non-fictional. Author David Wells stated, "Never before have we had more resources and technology to create a fake identity. We have the money, social media world, and we work hard to brand ourselves, to put an image of ourselves out there that isn't real." So, where do we begin? Where do we begin to find our true self? Now, this sounds all crazy because most people say, okay, it's the scripture, and we know that. We're getting there, okay? We are absolutely getting there. But as he states in these setup videos, it's all about unpacking, really breaking down what we're going to talk about tonight, that traditional and the modern. Really, these are the two fragile identity sources. Remember when we left you on that cliffhanger a couple weeks ago, and you were like, you said there's 3, and you didn't even say anything. Well, 2 of them are mentioned tonight. We're talking primarily about traditional identity. So that's one, and the other one is modern identity. But what happens when I change or my dream changes? You ever thought about that? What if I'm in conflict? All of these things that we find ourselves wondering. It's just that weak identity that we're speaking of. It all seems so random and overwhelming, yet supposedly determines our happiness and identity for the rest of our lives. The implications are so staggering, we often want to escape. It's easier not to think about it. Just grab another fistful of cotton candy and watch the fireworks. You know, every so often you find yourself, I just want to slip away and watch a movie and just drown myself in fantasy world, right? Maybe that's it. Maybe we're just too tired of trying to figure out exactly, who we are. Is it chance or is it just I was meant to be that really causes the real me to emerge? How do we find ourselves in this vast ocean of identity options? Are we doomed to experimentation, educated guesswork, hoping to get it right at some point before we die? Or do we have to waste a few decades trying and failing? Or what if we try relentlessly, but we can't find that elusive true self? What if we succeed and then lose it all? Worst yet, what if we succeed and success proves unfulfilling or fragile? It's easy to find people who have everything yet nothing. Many give a lifetime to pursue an idea of themselves that once achieved turns out to be unfulfilling. It's not hard to find despairing hearts in this world. Many come to believe that life itself just isn't worth living. This is the reason why we have so many actors and actresses and designers and people of that status that you find them dead in their bedroom because they committed suicide when they seemed to be grasping it all, right? Everybody looks to them for identity in a sense. Well, if I don't have that, we talked about it last week, if I don't have that brand, or if I don't have, that label, then I'm not complete, or whatever the case may be. And they literally created the brand and created the label, and yet they are committing suicide. Weak identity structures taunt us with go find yourself messages like giant cosmic bug lights. It's a beautiful picture. I get that image in your mind, The beautiful blue is intoxicating, but the reality is dangerous. They draw us closer with dazzling promises and palpable attraction. The, quote, happily ever after message appeals to our core desires, yet a world without a loving personal God doesn't deliver a happily ever after. It doesn't even pretend to. That's reality. God never says it's going to be a happily ever after. And that's, what that, I believe we all understand why that is the case. But honestly, if we're honest with ourselves, happily ever after really isn't what we're after. And so we just follow along here. Let me try to let's go ahead and jump into these identity sources. 1 John 4. When we start there, beloved. Verse 1, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. Every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, where ye have heard that it should come, and now, even now already it is in the world. Ye are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. They are of the world, therefore speak they of the world, and the world heareth them. We are of God, he that knoweth God heareth us, he that is not of God heareth not us. Hereby know we the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. So John sets it up beautifully. There's the world. Their message, by and large, is anti-Christ. Obviously, we understand, and I think a careful study of this is not the big, mean-headed Antichrist we're talking about, 666, coming back at the end times. He's going to have the same message, but how easily do we swallow the same type of message that he's going to have? And I believe that's exactly how John is setting it up in this chapter, in this portion of Scripture here. Listen, we buy hook, line, and sinker this narrative that the world wants to sell us. You gotta be this. If you're not successful in this, if you don't achieve this, if you don't have, then you are not. And we buy it. And that is, by and large, an antichrist message. And what we're after and what we're going to see as this all unfolds is an identity that is really, truly just wrapped up in Christ. And honestly, how could you lose then? You really just can't. But let's just be real, it's far easier said than done. Far easier said than done. The Apostle John is challenging us to understand the distinction between God's reality and the world's destructive identity substitutes. Specifically, what are those substitutes? Modern philosophy identifies two primary sources of identity. These competing identity sources show up in many of our favorite fictional stories. Philosopher Charles Taylor calls these two identities a traditional identity and a modern identity. So hold on to these terms and we will look at them for the rest of our journey. The traditional identity is fragile, and so is the modern identity. Actually, the modern identity is fraudulent. So we're going to go in there and we're going to jump in right now primarily into the traditional identity. All right. So what is traditional identity? Well, traditional identity is actually understanding how others define me. All right? It's who I am supposed to be according to how others write my story. I am who others say I am, or I am who you say I am. I'm defined by my ethnicity, my nationality, my parents, my community. It's external to us, forming from the outside in. We learn who we are by growing up, learning the ropes, keeping the rules, gaining the skills to survive and succeed in the culture into which, quote unquote, fate has placed us. This is all objective to us, outside of us and imposed on us as an infant. You didn't choose your gender. Now the world says you can, but we know that's not true. But that's all an attempt, right? It's all an attempt to identify themselves. This more wrapped up in the modern identity we'll talk about later. But you didn't choose yet. You didn't choose your ethnicity. If I went with the modern narrative, I could say that I identify as a 7-foot Mexican baby girl. And you are supposed to validate me with that, okay? So don't laugh, even though I'm laughing. But that's right. Isn't that what the world says? But, the traditional says, okay, you are your ethnicity, you are your family name, you are your hometown. I didn't choose my name. I didn't choose Andrew. Obviously, none of you chose that. And I think, obviously, we do have legal ways to change all that. I get that. But you didn't choose your personality. You didn't choose your abilities, your natural proclivities. I don't know why I hate onions, but I do, right? Well, she knows why, right? They tear our stomachs up, okay? So we're one in that one there. We're one in that. But things like, why do I enjoy fishing? Why do I enjoy reading? Why do I enjoy golfing? Why do I enjoy, and others don't? This is all things that was just placed on me, and that was, my dad was that. Or did they just happen to us? Or do we just believe they just are? Most generations of people haven't asked, who am I? Because really this question was answered for them. If we had this class 50 years ago, they'd be laughing us to scorn. Huh? I thought about that a while back. I'm like, man, a generation ago, they probably thought, what in the world? You have to figure out who you are. It speaks more to a culture now in which everybody's really trying to question just about everything out there. And there's not a problem asking questions as long as we land where we're headed on this. Traditional identity is subtly imposed upon us along with the framework of cultural expectations, rules, boundaries, behaviors that reinforce it or destroy it. I am my parents' child. I am my last name. I am the heir to my father's craft. I am obligated to my family, my tribe, my society, my religion, to be and do what others expect me to do. Right? I think we all can probably feel this to some extent. Well, my family has just been long, known for being, belligerent. And we're proud of it, okay? So we're just destined to be belligerent and proud of it, okay? Or we're just more passive. We're just, we just try to hide back in the, we stay in the background type people and just, okay? The traditional identity forces those types of narratives upon us, right? And so we're motivated to live up to that and into that identity because of the rewards. One real-life example of traditional identity was offered in an Atlantic article. Workism is making Americans miserable. And it begins with these words. For the college-educated elite, work has morphed into a religious identity, promising transcendence and community, but failing to deliver. Author Derek Thompson describes that the gospel of work has replaced traditional faith, leading people into a new form of worship. He writes, everybody worships something, and workism is among the most potent of the new religions competing for congregants. Yeah. Which is why, obviously, it's not, let's take this again. Let's take this same class and set it 50 years ago to have an argument of why a business should or shouldn't be opened on a Sunday. They don't even think twice about it anymore, right? Sports games. Like, it has become a thing to have on Sundays. And it just drags on people. But work is at the core. Work harder, work harder, work harder. This article goes on to describe how workism, I like how he calls it workism, has become the foundation of identity and purpose in our society. This is evident by the fact that we use our life margins to accomplish more work rather than rest or do other things. One of the most profound observations is that this drive is actually spiritual in nature and that our work is more than an economy. It's actually become an identity and a faith system that is proving to be insufficient. In the past century, the American conception of work has shifted from jobs to careers to callings. From necessity to status to meaning. I don't know. Does anybody disagree with that? I could see it. Why is workism so dangerous, though? Well, it makes us feel momentarily fulfilled, so becomes a source of identity. Achievement becomes our drug of choice, and work then becomes a crushing god that can only produce a weak identity. Another example of traditional identity can be found in the work of philosopher and author Jordan Peterson. If you've ever heard of him. He's pretty, as self-proclaimed atheist, but I think here in recent days he's tended to lean a little bit more towards actually believing. But he says this. He rebukes though rejecting essential biblical truth, Peterson rebukes modern adults with his treatise called 12 Rules for Life, which reads like a parental lecture on taking up responsibility, working hard, and getting your life together. It's a traditional save yourself message with lots of practical and workable advice, but its popularity is perplexing. A generation that could... I thought this was funny. A generation that rejects 10 moral absolutes provided by a loving God apparently prefers 12 provided by a Canadian philosopher. His subtitle is An Antidote to Chaos, accurately touching the raw nerve of our longing for an identity rather than random natural causes, and meaninglessness. So that's just where the world is looking and grasping and clinging to all that they can. And in this particular, I wasn't aware of this until I read the book, but 12 rules for life, they're going to latch on to that and reject the 10 commandments by loving God, right? A traditional identity is made weak by failure or by behavior that threatens our sense of acceptance, security, and significance. Others set the expectation, we fail to achieve, and we lose affirmation. Our sense of self is diminished, which makes life almost unbearable. We start over, try harder, work longer, or give up and run away, all to either gain the identity our hearts crave or escape the sense that we never can. Have you ever been there? I'll just give up. Tried hard enough and I can't meet the standard. I can't match the expectation. Well, that's that traditional identity that's really crumbling and just crashing in on you. We've all been there, I'm sure. Traditional identity is a mixed bag. In many ways, it's how the world works, but in deeper ways, it's insufficient. So let's break it down. First of all, how traditional identity is good. Are we tracking along okay on this? Have I missed any? Okay. First of all, it's good because it serves the good of community and does what is noble and honorable for others. Or it serves community and honors legacy. How about that? I did a lot of wording in that one, but it's good because it serves community and honors legacy. This traditional identity, it serves family, country, church, sacrifices itself to bless others, lifts up civilized life with moral behavior and community ideals. It calls you to do what's best for the most people. It compels you to love sacrificially, do what's right, regardless of your emotions and desires. For thousands of years, traditional identity has motivated soldiers to sacrifice their lives, students to aim higher, first responders to run into harm's way, parents to provide or protect, leaders to lead well, athletes to win. The world functions within the framework of traditional identity. Traditional identity says you are accepted, secured, and significant as you take responsibility to live out your life for the good of others, which is both selfless and selfish. It satisfies others' needs as well as your own. It goes like this: be good and you'll have a strong self. Traditional identity is good as it calls you to accept your immediate community and responsibilities and steward them for the good of a greater whole around you. This identity is why the civilized world works. It's why we pay taxes, have neighbors, and enjoy friendships. Civil and social culture works within a traditional identity framework. We all behave well for the benefit of the whole. So we all can see that. We all can understand how this is primarily and by and large why we go after a good traditional identity. But how is traditional identity bad or insufficient? Well, mainly because it's performance-based and conditional. A traditional identity is only as strong as you are good in the eyes of others. We've talked about this and how, I know probably if we went through the room, maybe some of you have experienced this even in your own upbringing, in your own home culture. Perform well, and boy, that's a good boy, that's a good girl, But the ones that didn't perform well, they're just struggling, They just have a hard time. I just don't know if they're going to make it, right? That's how they're identified, and we project that on them. And then You bring that culture, that same identity structure into a church setting, and if you don't, if you're not in church on Sunday, or if you're not in church on Sunday night, or not in church on Wednesday, or the special revivals, and it's like, okay, well, what are you doing? You're not performing well. Now, by and large, the grace that flows from us will motivate us to do that, and that's where we're after. We're after the grace that God has done and lived out for us and given to us will motivate us to do these things. But then it no longer becomes a box to check. But that's performance-based and conditional. That's the weak part of this identity. Well-behaved, high-performing, and hardworking people thrive in a traditional identity world. They're rewarded for their fulfillment of responsibility. They're successful. Never mind whether they are doing what they were created to do. Never mind whether they are personally fulfilled. Acceptance, security, and significance have been achieved by hard work and good behavior. As long as you get the pat on the back, right? As long as you have the attaboy, as long as you have the awards to prove it, you're good. Even though when you really talk to that athlete, they don't feel happy at all. Yeah, they might have won the MVP for the year, but are really truly happy? Acceptance, security, and significance have been achieved by hard work and good behavior. This identity is based upon your ability to increasingly do or outdo yourself for others, which is eventually unsustainable and exhausting. The problem, the quote that was made in that book, or the article about the workism, use this description. He says, the problem with this gospel is that your dream job is out there, so never stop hustling, is that it's a blueprint for spiritual and physical exhaustion. Long hours don't make anybody more productive or creative. They make people stressed, tired, and bitter. I think I can see that too. But we got the award. We got the promotion. We got the raise. This identity is also based upon acceptance from others when they prove our performance, which laces our relationship with conditional factors. So, performance and conditional. As long as I perform, I am accepted. You stop performing, you are no longer accepted. I am affirmed as long as I am producing. I am accepted as long as I'm useful. The moment I become unproductive or unuseful, my identity is in jeopardy. The loss of acceptance, security, and significance always hangs over my head. Rejection is one failure away. And it goes both ways. Do for others, and we expect them to do for us. It's a two-way street that fuels identity on both sides of the equation. This actually subtly goes against our desire for unconditional love. That desire to be loved for who we are. We instinctively expect parents to love their children unconditionally. We long for perfect, pure love. Love conferred, not earned. Love that is received freely, not achieved. This is love that cannot be lost by poor performance. We need to be loved in failures as much as in successes, which is why the love of God speaks so deeply to us. Because He does not grant it to us because of something we've done. It's never conditional. But traditional identity doesn't offer this kind of love. It's only as strong as your ability to meet expectations. So, that's how it's bad. Now let's talk about how it's all losable. So it's good because it helps its community and honors legacy, right? It's bad because it's performance-based and conditional. It's losable because I am dependent on others. You are hopelessly hostage to outside opinions and imposed standards of measurement. You know, the cults. We were talking about cults the other day, my wife and I. And There's always a standard in there, right? You got to do this. You have to live up to this. You have to be in this community. You have to wear this type of outfit. You have to look this type of way, cut your hair a certain way, But that's always subject to the person in charge. So that's the reason why a lot of cults get bad rap. However, this traditional identity can be a cult. It can be, you are hopelessly hostage. I like that statement, hopelessly hostage to outside opinions and imposed standards of measurement. Nobody really truly knows what that standard of measurement is until you don't reach it. And then somebody tells you. Then they bring down the hammer. This identity cannot withstand failure. And it's always threatened by the possibility of shame and rejection. Fear is always hiding just below the surface. If you don't live up to the demand of others, guilt and shame will follow. Fear of rejection becomes a powerful motivator, albeit a psychologically oppressive one. People just go crazy in this type of environment. And, if we aren't careful, as a church, we can impose this on other people. Someone once recently said in this book here, says, if you give someone the power to approve of you, you also give them the power to disapprove of you, and that is actually too much power to give to any individual. Personal failure can destroy a traditional identity, so can the loss of ability to perform to standard or outperform your past self. When I think about someone like Miss Audrey's, and I just realized I failed to mention Cody in our prayer this morning, or this afternoon. But someone like him, who is confined to a wheelchair, and that now society has him identified as a handicapped individual. And yes, he's got a lot of restrictions, but society by and large has nothing to do with that man now. Why is that? That man is just as special and powerful and valuable to a loving God as you and I. Is the strongest performer on the field at the Kansas City Chiefs game, okay? But the world has him boxed in, and he has lost his identity because of this disease that he has unfortunately succumbed to, right? And how many of us have become handicapped in our way of living because we're so worried about what other people think, and we're so just, well, if they don't approve of me, or this person doesn't see me in that way, or this value here, I don't get this affirmation here, or then it's all losable, and we have no hope. Traditional identity isn't only fragile and losable, it's guaranteed to be lost. Later, if not sooner. Why? Because nobody's perfect. You will be a disappointment to someone and to yourself at some point. And when that disappointment comes, that's when the rubber meets the road. And so it is good, it is bad, it is losable, but also it's cruel because it's unsustainable and steamrolls individuality. In recent decades, traditional identity has been demonized because for its insufficiencies. Strange, maybe not. Why? What could be harmful about honor and character and integrity? Well, there's a demon waiting in the shadows of performance-based system, like the walls that begin to close in on you. Imagine yourself being in a room where the walls begin to start closing in on you. Good performance closes in with demands for better and perpetual performance. Over the long term, there's a price we pay with our souls. Our identities imperceptibly melt into our hard work, usually at the expense of more valuable things. In this relentless cycle, the most valuable relationships of life, those of unconditional love, become subservient to the conditional relationships and the rewards of achievement. They must, because this is about retaining our identities. Our very core is at stake. Therefore, we neglect those who deeply love us to please those who merely love what we produce. Think about that. How many people do that? Neglect what we deeply love to please those who merely love what we produce. Until you can't produce, the two are extremely hard to distinguish. And this is why, especially upper 20s, early 30 to mid 40 somethings, like it is very uncommon to see them getting locked in church, in ministry. Because the world out there says, you got to have the, big land and the big houses and the big cars and the possessions and there's really nothing wrong with having those things, right? We know that. But at the expense of this, right? Losing, it's the unconditional love, right? Serving a God who loves us unconditionally, only to get the attaboys from those in our job, at our workplace, at our bosses, or maybe even become the CEO of the company. For what? I remember hearing a story, whether or not it was true, because a preacher told it. I remember hearing a story about a man that the preacher approached the man and said, "Hey, I see your business is doing well." I said, "Yes." He goes, "I have a goal in 5 years to be a millionaire." He said, "Well, listen, you just got to make sure you don't miss out on your family." He goes, "Oh, yeah, when I make $1 million, they won't be missing out on anything." And he did it. 5 years. Later on, sometime the pastor said he was talking to the man. The man said, "I did it. I made $1 million, but I lost my family." And how many of those stories are out there? You made what you were looking for. You grasped what you were looking for, but you lost the things that meant the most. So finally, traditional identity always subjugates individuality to community, stifles your gifts, swallow your dreams and desires. Others are depending on you. The others take precedent over the individual. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Interestingly, it's both. So stay with us. Modern narratives idolize individuality and therefore scream at the seeming injustice of community trampling it. It's almost criminalized. Shouldn't my uniqueness and individuality matter? Shouldn't I have the right to dream, desire, and be myself? Traditional identity says no. You have a responsibility to be who you have to be, not who you want to be. Responsibility trumps individuality. Then this begs the question, must there be tension between who I have to be and who I want to be? Do individuality and community unavoidably conflict, or can there be resolution and reconciliation between the two? Actually, it's a very prevalent false dichotomy. It's a big word. Don't ask me to describe it, but I know it's a conflicting word. I'm sorry? Opposite. Okay, I was going to say conflicting, but so, where are we at on the notes here in time? We got time. We about done? Cruel? Did I already give you that? Okay. So, the misinformed dichotomy. How can I be myself and be for the community? How can I form who I have to be with who I want to be? A significant part of our identities is built on traditional structures, which is good and normal, but also insufficient. A purely traditional identity is destined to bring us loss. It falls short and can't take us all the way home. We all desire the approval from our people. And this, it's not wrong, okay? It's not wrong to have approval or anything, whether family, friends, co-workers, community, but that approval or lack of it doesn't sufficiently define us. We all need to feel accepted and significant, but those feelings are fragile and deficient. This identity is dependent on others, conditioned on good work and dismissive of uniqueness. It's easily undone and really doesn't care about our personal dreams. Traditional identity isn't evil, it's collapsible. It's a loss waiting to surprise us. It can't ever be the fullness of identity we need. This isn't anyone's fault. It's merely the objective reality of our world. Remember Simba in Lion King? When he couldn't bear the burden of rejection at Pride Rock and the responsibility for his father's death? The underlying philosophies in these stories play out in our real lives as well. That's why the stories resonate with us. We feel the rejection. We feel the struggles that the characters feel in these stories we love. We identify with their identity struggles and cheer ourselves on in their triumphs. You know? You see, we get into those movies and it's like, whatever, right? They're all fake. But the point he's making here, the reason they resonate a lot with times with people is because it really truly is written from a heart of someone who's seeking an identity. The Simba just couldn't wait to be king. And then when it finally came all pouring down and crashing down, what did he do? He ran. Because he thought that nobody cared for him. And that it was all lost. Why? Why do we cheer these people? Because in real life, the definitions forced on us by others can never sufficiently define us. We are more than what we do, how we perform, or what others say we must be. And we'll never be able to live up to Peterson's 12 rules or anybody else's rules perfectly, including our own. You set the standard high and set the bar really high, I promise you will continuously fail to meet that standard. As with all these examples, one indicator of a collapsing traditional identity is resentment of the structure. The people who constructed it, or those who failed to live up to it. In each of these scenarios, the characters we connect with are facing dual struggles. The first is the fear of losing a traditional identity, the fear of shame and rejection. The second is the allure of individuality, the passion to be true to self and personal dreams, which actually does set us up for the next, which we'll get into next week, modern identity. So this is the reason why in today's world, again, we'll get into this next week, but in today's world, it's like, okay, well, traditional identity, I'm a failure. Therefore, I define who I am. And I cannot be a failure. Now you must accept me. Right? Now, if you don't accept me, you are the failure. Okay? So, that sets it up for next week. But we want to take some time. We have a few minutes for the discussion questions that are there. How have any of you, or how have you seen this struggle play out in your life? Now, I resonate with what he mentioned, what he said there towards the end, and that we then become, what was the word he used? Hold on. Let me make sure I got the word. Resentment of the structure. Okay? I've had resentment of the because I grew up in church and I have had resentment of the structure in which I grew up in, the performance-based. You don't reach this status. You don't look this way. You don't act this way. You don't listen to this type of music. You don't, perform this to this standard, then you are a failure. I've literally heard a preacher say, how can you be right with God if you don't? And they just list it off, Now, there may be some true statements in there, except for that's someone projecting that onto us. And I became, probably still, if I'm honest with myself, have some resentment in that. I have to guard against that. And so, resentment of the structure, I think I've seen that struggle play out in my life. Anybody else want to comment on that? This, not necessarily resentment of the structure, but the struggle of the traditional identity.
The fear of shame and rejection.
Yeah, absolutely.
I laugh because, you don't get to be 63 and have not struggled with this in about every area that you talked about. I mean, the church, you know, when you don't agree with something, you go to the leadership, go to the elders first, discuss it with them, don't discuss it with everybody else. You go to them. That got me and my ex-husband kicked out of a church, and they tried to separate our kids from us. So Ben struggled, you know, I had a struggle there. You know, my kids grew up and they got married to other people, and they started listening to other people, and other families wanted their time too. So there was a lot of resentment there. It's like, those are my people. You know, you're taking. So, you know, I had finding an identity there. Still working on that one. You know, and then I get a divorce after 39 years. That's like, you know, the world blew up. So when you get this age, it's like I've hit them all, and I'm still trying to figure out, who am I? What is my purpose? What is my, not my purpose, I guess, my identity? Who am I at this age?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Absolutely. Anybody else?
I think I can identify excuse me, with the identity of the word workism or whatever it is. You know, like in our family, I've talked about that. That was like the harder you work, the more you got noticed, because there was a lot of us. And I just carried that into everywhere I went, and I can see the good in that. I was able to work my way up in jobs pretty easily. But, you know, as soon as you do something wrong or whatever, I mean, there goes your identity. And it's always in jeopardy, and you're always worried. And, you know, once you get in the corporate world, which I was in for a very long time, it was dog eat dog, you know, and, yeah, I started realizing, like, wait a second, I don't want to do that. But then you start losing your identity, and you're like, wait a second, what do I, you know, now who am I? And, you know, so then you start looking, where is your identity? And unless you land at Christ, you're really not landing in the right spot. You know, I could say, well, okay, now I'm a homeschool mom, when I can identify that way. Or I was recently, you and I, maybe you were listening, or maybe it was just me, I can't remember, but how churches can have identities. You know, that's a homeschool church, or they're this kind of church, or that kind, you know, like kind of, but really our identity needs to be in Christ.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really get into it. And in the book, he gets into it, but talks about that, you know, even the good things, the homeschool mom, but these guys will grow up, then what?
Right, then
If
what
she
am I?
wraps it all into being a homeschool mommy, or a stay-at-home mommy, or a pastor's wife, a pastor, you know, if I wrap it all in that, good things. You know, I enjoy being a pastor. You know, I never thought I would like this, but I do. I get a kick out of it. And, but, you know, like my youth pastor, he's a pastor now, but he's like, you know, I just remember the day I realized that all pastors are interim pastors. And really, truly, like, we are just shepherds in his flock. He is the chief shepherd, and he's going to move us on, or he's going to move on without us, or whatever. And so, yeah, good stuff. Okay. He says, discuss the good and bad of this identity structure. You know, I just mentioned it. Is there anything wrong with being identified as a pastor, or a mama, or a grandmother, or a good employee at Charles?
Edward Jones.
Oh, Edward Jones. I was going to say Charles Schwab. Totally got that one wrong. See, your identity is totally wrapped up in the wrong place. No. A great employee, a great mama, a great, daughter, a great son, cameraman. But
He's like, nope.
there's something good about that, right? But if that's all we wrap it in, then it becomes when he can't, because maybe he hurts something and he can't sit back there and run the camera anymore, or a debilitating disease keeps you from being a Edward Jones employee, or you lose your eyesight and you can't become a pastor. We know a man here in Topeka, a pastor friend, that had to step down because he got some kind of disease where his body, it was like if he said if he was sitting here reading his notes, it looked like the notes were going like this. And he struggled through that for years, but he had to step down not too long ago. And, so everything, right, there's good, but then there's bad. So anybody want to add to that conversation? I know I kind of probably took the fire out of there, but
You had mentioned Cody, and something that I have found interesting, because for a long time after Cody first got to the point where he couldn't really do much for himself, he wouldn't let anybody near him. He didn't want anybody to see him, because, he was jerking, and this is before he became paralyzed, but, and people don't stop by and see him, and I don't go out there unless, I know it's okay, because, it's hard for him, and communicating is so hard, but he's been getting on Facebook more and expressing the difficulty that this disease has brought, and the hospital stays how he misses his little boy and stuff. But he gets literally hundreds of not just likes, but comments from people out there in Roscoe. And if there is a silver lining, is that his faith is keeping him going. And people are seeing it. It's amazing, more so than his life would have. I mean, and I don't want to say I wish this on him, because I would never, ever. But,
it's good. I like that.
The good is he's reaching people.
he is, yeah. He says,
Good
every
deal.
day I wake up and I find something to feel blessed about and something worth living for.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, I would have thrown in the towel.
No, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. I think we saw a couple years back, we saw footage of a man. He's going around to different churches now. He travels around, and he just got little stumps right here. Like he was born this way, he didn't have real legs, just like literally like 2 stumps down here. And that guy just like, I mean, the world would kind of laugh at him, but I mean, he does. He just gets up there and he's got his little stubby hands and he holds a mic and he just gives the gospel. And those are people that just live through it, right? And they're inspiring, aren't they? Inspiring people. So good stuff. We are dismissed. I appreciate your time tonight, and don't burn and melt, because the heat's cranking now, isn't it? So hope everybody has a good week, and don't forget, ladies, there's a brunch on Saturday, so we'll be here to serve up some good food.
Have you gotten any